Welcome to the Construction Leading Edge, the podcast dedicated to helping construction professionals become better entrepreneurs and leaders. Now, let's get started.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of The Construction Leading Edge, the site and podcast dedicated to helping construction professionals become more effective entrepreneurs and leaders. My name is Todd DeWalt, and I will be your host today. Today we have with us Kevin Lewis, the president of the Construction Owners Association of America, an organization with a mission to support project owners' success in the design and construction of projects and facilities. The purpose of this call is to talk about the perspective of the project owner, in other words, the client, our customer, to get a better understanding of what is important to project owners so that we as contractors can ultimately deliver a better product and be more successful. So Kevin, I appreciate you taking the time to be on this call this morning. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm great, and I'm very happy to be with you. Thank you for the invitation.
Excellent. I'm glad it worked out. I'm excited about what we're going to talk about today, and I really think it's going to bring a lot of value to the folks that are listening to this call. So we'll just jump into the questions that I have for you. So first of all, if you would, please provide a brief overview of the COAA, the Construction Owners Association of America, and tell us what it's all about.
Sure. Well, COA was founded in 1994 by Albert Phillips, who was an attorney in the Atlanta area, and he had represented owners for quite a while and produced a set of owner documents, and then started realizing the need for those folks in that market to have a voice in the industry, and he started talking about getting interest. He sent mailers out to different owners that he knew and to get interest in establishing this nonprofit organization that would represent the owner's voice. And he selected a core group of owners that would serve as the founding directors. And as they started to meet and realize what a unified mission they had, and they were all convinced that there was a need for this organization to go. And so as they went forward, they had their charter membership included, I think it was 150 or so members, and they had some, those were all owners, and then they had also had a handful, 15 or 20 associate members that would help advise and help provide that other voice that we needed to hear to make sure that we were, had a clear understanding of the whole industry. In '96, Norm Niederman from Harvard Medical Center was elected chairman of the board, and then later became the first president of the association. And from there on, we've had 20 years of some pretty significant contributions to the industry. We started with a strategic plan back in the late '90s, and we had some goals to be, first of all, to improve our industry and to have greater control over the end product. And the way you do that is with good relationships, not just to take control, but to create an environment where you had a partnership, not only with your design team, which was the standard model, but also with the constructors and the construction industry itself. And that would bring a balance to the industry. And overall, this group provided this independent focal point for our leadership in our industry, and we've been going strong ever since.
Gotcha. So just to clarify, when we talk about project owners, who are some of the folks that make up your group when you say project owners?
Well, there's a wide variety of that. We have quite a few folks. I personally am a K-12 elementary through high school public school construction owner, so we have a fairly good size system where we build a lot of new schools. That we have a number of members in that category, but we have higher ed with all the colleges and universities across the country, when they are a huge influence and a big help with educating our membership. We also have the industrial base and the business base, and all kinds of owners. Healthcare is a big part of that. So we have a number of members from across the gamut of different markets in the industry, and those folks are the owners who construct and then live in their buildings. So we have a vested interest when we do a project. We don't just build a building and sell it and move on. We're going to live in our building. So that construction piece is key to our utility costs in the future, our sustainability initiatives, all those things. So we are the folks that own and operate our buildings once they're constructed, and represent the process through the construction and design development, that type of thing.
Gotcha. Tell me about some of the biggest challenges that construction owners are facing today.
Well, as the industry changes and progresses in a lot of ways, and right now we're working hard to bridge the gap between different delivery methods and developing ways to collaborate, cooperate among the team members. Traditionally, those things in the past, those different groups, of the designers and constructors and owners, would position themselves in anticipation of an adversarial role. And our goal here is to try to bring this together as as a unified direction, and everyone had the same goals in mind. So the project delivery methods that are coming out and being developed and have been in place for years are constantly being developed to try to take away some of that adversarial situation and make a better team from the whole group and have projects be a lot more successful. In addition to that, we have technology, and we're trying to work with developing strategies for a single platform for the digital communication. Everybody has different symbols and that type of thing. We have CAD, and now we've got BIM, and so we want to have all those systems talk to each other. And also, from a facilities standpoint, when you're an owner, you want to have a document or a set of documents that you can turn over to your facilities folks to run and manage the building for years. So that is all, in years past have been separate camps, so to speak. So we want to now have, the designers thinking about the maintenance workers down the road and making sure that we have a single format to speak to, and we all have the same language. And that's been quite an effort that's been underway for a while, and it's a great challenge, but it's one that COE is right in the middle of and trying to help steer that in a way that would benefit us all.
Gotcha. Yeah. Several things there I'd like to unpack a little bit. One, tell us about the delivery methods. There's the traditional design, bid, build approach, which works to varying degrees. What are some of the more effective methods that you're seeing emerge today?
Well, I don't know if effective is the right term. There are different ways to do things, a lot of different ways. There is that, as you mentioned, the design, bid, build, but there are also many different best value delivery methods where you don't just choose the low bid, you choose the best value, and that includes price, but it also includes qualifications and different types of formats that you can go through, the construction management at risk or construction management by agency, design, build. There are many different ways to do that, and no one particular delivery method is best for everyone. So we have certain cases in our program where we would use a different method than maybe the traditional, just depending on the conditions of the project. So that's where your construction owner's team is so important, that they are knowledgeable in the industry. And I have personally learned more about all those things by going to these as an owner, going and sitting down with contractors and designers and realizing where and when you would choose one delivery method over another and when things were successful. And this is an open forum. There's no competition among us, and it's a great place to share and get that education. So there's no one real easy answer for that, but there are a lot of different ways we can go. And being a part of a group like this really helps you understand the choices and which one would be best, a better fit for your particular project.
Well, let me ask you this: from a contractor's perspective, is it appropriate for a contractor to suggest a delivery method to an owner who is in the early stages of maybe they find out that they have a project in the design phase? Is it appropriate for a contractor to say to a client, "Hey, have you considered a different delivery method?" And if so, how would you suggest the contractor go about that?
Well, certainly it is definitely appropriate. Now, sometimes the hard part is, depending on the owner's organization and what their history is, sometimes those delivery methods are already decided before before the contractor even finds out about a project, and then obviously it's too late. But I have contractors come in all the time into my office and say, "Hey, I see you have 2 or 3 of this type of project, but this one over here looks like it would be better suited for a construction management project or what they call a P3, a public-private partnership." And so folks will come in and say, I'm just bringing it up, and it's a good business relationship, and we talk about relationships all the time, and we value those even in, or especially in, the market we're in. So I don't think it's at all inappropriate, and I think it's just an open conversation. And folks that come up to me usually just do it and say, "Hey, I got an idea for you. What do you think?" and sometimes we'll sit down and talk about it, and sometimes it's just we think it doesn't fit. Again, the trick to that is for that owner's rep to be knowledgeable, and if they don't have the the background or the technical expertise, call a friend, call a co-owner, or call a design firm that may have expertise in it. And the trick is not to shut the door on anything. Open it up and make sure that it is either viable or not with regard to your particular project. So there's a lot of homework to do, and we learn a lot from our I always learn something when a contractor comes in and says, "I got an idea for you." Even if it doesn't work out, it's always an opportunity for me to learn, different parameters and different advantages to a particular situation.
So owners are not all knowing. Is that what you're telling me, Kevin?
That's exactly what I'm telling you.
That's good. I think that's a paradigm that a lot of contractors have, is that it's completely out of bounds to make any sort of suggestions about project delivery or approach to a project, and it's probably due to the old design bid build approach, where your job is just to construct and not worry about anything else. So that's good to hear. Talk a little bit about sustainability for a couple of minutes. What should contractors know about the importance of sustainability? Because the whole green movement, even to me, I've been involved in some LEED certified projects, but I'm not sure I really understand the value to the owner of having a sustainable building. So if you could talk to us a little bit about why that's so important.
Well, it's a huge issue or an opportunity too. I mean, we at Loudon Schools, we produce a document that says here are our sustainability goals, and we're not in the market to get certification, but that's our choice. And the value of that certification is different for different people. Or higher education or a business-related type owner would have some marketability to that, for their potential clients or students that would, value that differently than others. I mean, the important thing is that we're all doing everything we possibly can that makes sense for our particular project to conserve and sustain our environment. And as long as you have a systematic approach, I mean, if you think about an owner that has a small staff that may not have the opportunity to get all the training and education they need, any one of the certification processes, whether it be LEED or Green Globes or TRIPS or all those things, provide you a basis and a form, a format to follow and help you make decisions. And so maybe in those cases, the certification is the perfect route. For owners that are larger and have a staff that may have certified professionals on their staff, they can maybe have a better assessment process to know whether or not the certification is the right way to go. But whether you use the certification or not, you have to have clear goals and clear metrics by which to measure whether or not the design team or the constructors team or the owner afterwards is operating the building properly. We participate very heavily in the Energy Star program by the EPA, which is, based a lot on the performance of the building after it's built and occupied. And so we take a lot of effort to train our occupants and the people and the students. And the students in our schools are just gung-ho on conserving energy and that. So you teach people how to use a building properly. You can have the best built building and not operate it correctly, and you haven't accomplished anything. So if you build a really good building with all the sustainability goals in mind and then operate it properly, then you've got a good combination there. And so
gotcha. Makes sense. And that's from a contractor standpoint. I think the whole sustainability movement's a little bit cloudy. We see owners looking for LEED platinum buildings and LEED gold buildings, but we sort of chase that work and do what we need to do, but it's not all that well understood. So really it is important to clients, and it sounds like it's something that we need to be aware of. And is it safe to say the sustainability movement is not going anywhere?
It absolutely is, and then kudos to the organizations that were out there and created these metrics and the different certification programs, because if nothing else, it was a hugely successful awareness program that brings everyone into that picture. So everyone needs to stay at it. The hard part for the green movement is going to be to sustain that movement and make sure that people continue. The good news is many things that were new and things to achieve in those rating scales in the past have now become standard operating procedures. So that's a great thing that's happened over time. So now we got to find a way to continually raise the bar and make sure we don't lose focus on that and just have it be forgotten because it is such a huge impact to our environment. And so that's why we produce a document that said here are our environmental sustainability goals for the project. And that way the designers and the contractors know what our goals are as the owner.
Gotcha. So a few years ago, when the green movement first emerged, there were the early adopters who saw it as being important, and they adopted it earlier than the middle of the bell curve, so to speak. So what are some of what are the early adopters in the building and the construction industry looking at right now that would be the wave of the future in the industry?
From a sustainability standpoint?
Well, from overall, not necessarily just sustainability. Perhaps it's technology, delivery methods, anything that you see as that the innovative early adopters, perhaps in your organization, are implementing in their projects that contractors need to be looking at right now, so that when it becomes mainstream, they'll be ready.
Well, it's interesting you said that, because a lot of times I see, if I understood your question right, the exact opposite of what you describe as in many ways, the contracting community, the builders and constructors across this country are the leaders in our industry with a lot of new things, with a lot of new technology. And I think BIM is a perfect example of that. As owners set the standard for what the building project is going to entail, and then their first relationship in the standard procurement process is with the designers. So we go and say, we want you to design a building. The owners, and that's one of the things COA is recognizing, what an important role we play in this, and that's one of the things that why we're out there working on certain things. But BIM is an example where the contractors came through from the backside of the project and said, owners and architects, you need to embrace this. Here are all the advantages of that. And I witnessed that myself, where the architects weren't on the early adopter side, whereas the contractors were, and they were seeing the value of that for producing it. So I had several projects where we traditionally designed a building in CAD and 2D. The contractors were turning our 2D drawings into BIM models and coming back to us and showing us the value. And as I became more involved with COA, I saw that whole movement take place, and where the owners are starting to say, well, we need to take a lead role in this and be the early adopters, so that, or at least we were following. We weren't the early because contractors were there, but help transition, raise the bar for our architects. And of course, part of this is the owner's fault for having held fees down. So it's hard for the architects that are set with an expectation from an owner what things should cost for them to move the next role. So as we got involved and saw that, it's just been a wonderful contribution that the constructor side of the house has provided to this industry with BIM, and I think it's been a huge influence. And right now the same thing is happening, and one of the things that COA has embraced and is working on is some people, I don't know how many different ways to refer to it, but the COBE data movement, where we're all trying to have a standard format for nomenclature and ways to produce stuff, so that when I turn my BIM model over to facilities, we're using the same nomenclature, the same technology to identify different features of the building. So that's one of those things we're all embracing right now. And COA is on that leading edge of that as well, prompted by, I believe, the construction industry. So it's been a great partnership, but I think it's one of those things that's hard to get everybody to go together, and that's one of COA's goals, is to bring everyone together so we're all moving in that same path at the same pace.
Great. Are there any other things that you're seeing that BIM's been around for several years now, and it seems to be hitting more of the mainstream? What are some things that may be on the edge right now that you see perhaps contractors are bringing to the table that we should be looking at? Maybe they'll hit mainstream, maybe they won't. You never know. But what are some things that contractors should be looking at that maybe were the BIM of 5 years ago?
Well, and I'm not sure. I think this particular topic is a little bit farther along, but I think it's the one that comes to my mind is back again to the topic of project delivery methods, where even in a construction management or a best value type of delivery method, we still have some traditional roles. In the integrated project delivery, IPD, is where maybe someday we're all going to end up where it's a three-way contract between the owner, the contractor, and the architect or designers, where that's one single contract instead of two separate ones. Right now, we have a contract with our designers and we have a contract with our constructors, and everyone wants a perfect project, and as long as everybody goes together, then it's a great partnership. But when things go wrong, then people have to choose sides, and that's where we're trying to find a way, to eliminate the side taking, and to have everyone go together. And if we got a problem, let's all work together and try to minimize the impact. And you can't afford for a relationship where the owner thinks the contractor's trying to, overbill or take advantage of a situation, or the same place where the contractor feels the owner is doing the same thing, and then designers all too often get caught in the middle of that. So that's where we're headed now, where there's a lot of focus on trying to find ways to bridge those relationship gaps to make sure that we are, have a unified front, and ultimately the project will be more successful when that takes place.
Sure. Let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about what are some of the most common complaints or points of pain that project owners have when it comes to contractors specifically, and what can we do as contractors to fix that?
Well, most of the time, my experience is those types of things happen when there's a conflict or an issue on the job, and in many cases, when there is something that has affected the performance of a contractor, whether it be a natural disaster or some kind of storm or bad weather or whatever, and the contractor is put in a position where they have to recover from some sort of a damage. The trick is, how do we find a way to sit down and say, look, this has happened to me, and we all have different types of contract formats, but if you get into a situation where a contractor is concerned about being held responsible or being damaged financially from a particular event, sometimes they are at their own by their own mistake or issues they had. Sometimes it's things out of their control. The trick is to sit down and make sure that there's a way forward, and that everybody understands that. The owners, I can say that our goal is never to damage a contractor. We've never had that mindset whatsoever. At the same time, we have this pull. In my particular case, is we have taxpayers' money that we're responsible for. So we have to, we've got to sit down in that room and make sure that everyone knows what the problem is, how we're going to address the problem, and move forward together, and not go to our corners and try to do as much damage as possible. And as soon when a relationship is formulated that both sides understand the goals of the other, you're going to be a whole lot better off. And one of the things that we do now is, especially when we have a contractor that's new to our program, we have a meeting with the top level people, and sit down in a room and say, what are your goals? What are your things? And we ask the question you just asked. What are your pet peeves? What means the most to you? And for me, it's getting students in our building that don't even know who the constructor people are. People should walk into a new building that occupy it and think about a really cool building, not think about the fact that they didn't move in until the day before classes started. So understanding one's goals, I think, it's just not something the contractors can do to fix the relationship. It's something we all need to do. And the best way to do that, in my view, is to sit down before the project starts. You never want to have the first meeting of the principals of the owner and the company be over a dispute or an issue. You want to have that first initial meeting, establish a relationship, establish your goals, get to know these folks. So when something comes up, you have some level of trust, or at least an understanding of where they're coming from.
Gotcha. No, that's great. I completely agree. That's the dealing with a conflict is the worst time to have a first meeting.
Right.
Well, let's talk about that. You talked about goals and priorities. What are, because honestly, from a contractor's perspective, the owner's goals sometimes are behind a veil that they just can't see. So, and what that does is that leads contractors to have poorly prepared sales processes. For example, contractors may go down in the weeds on technical issues when an owner is mostly concerned with the look and feel of a building or how their occupants feel when they're in the building, and they don't really care what type of air handler is being used. So, what are some of the top priorities of project owners that contractors are missing or may not be aware of? Does that make sense?
It does, and that's going to vary from owner to owner. And I'll go back to my example. At building schools is one thing we always try to say when we have our pre-construction meeting and pre-bid meetings and pre-schedule meetings is we make sure that the contractors are aware of the importance of particular items. And for us, everybody in the K-12 construction industry knows that school starts the first weekend in September or whatever. What some folks fail to ever recognize in the industry is, well, there's 150 to 200 staff members that come on board July 1st. So our completion date is not August or September 1st. It's 2 months earlier than that because we have a whole bunch of people that need a place to live. So we try to make sure that people understand that the goals are here is not, don't assume you know how an owner operates. Make sure that everyone's aware of what's happening. And, in a particular case for us, a high school, the athletic season, football and all the fall sports start a month before school starts. So those buildings have to be in and operational 60 days before the first day of school. So establishing those milestones in the schedule and making sure everyone's aware of it, that's the critical thing. But that's where the owner needs to make sure that they establish all that and make it clear, and then help along the way. We ask the contractor to put in their construction schedule our delivery dates for furniture, fixtures, and equipment, that type of stuff, so they're aware from the very beginning that we've approved a schedule that has our dates, and that also holds us accountable. So as soon as we put our skin in the game that we have to make sure our stuff is there on time, then they can see where it's a two-way street, and we're holding ourselves accountable as well as them. And then just establish that criteria, our goals, and that's something we learned over time, is to make sure you're forthright with all those things and don't hold things back. And it's hard for a contractor to get something out of an owner that won't share it. And obviously that's why you asked the question. But if you can sit down and express why that's so important, it's important, Mr. Owner, because if this happens, then this could affect this particular thing. So how do you want us to handle that, and what is your goal for that particular item?
So what I'm hearing you say is that the expectations and the priorities of the owner may not be contained in the stack of contract documents, and it's okay, yea, even advisable to sit down with the owner and say, what are the priorities, what are the things that may or may not be so obvious here that they may or may not have thought about. Because in my experience, typically, well, in some cases, I shouldn't say typically, in some cases, in the rush to get the bid documents out the door on the street for bid, some of the more important priorities don't make it in there. And so it's advisable to have a conversation with the contractor, or as a contractor, to have a conversation with the owner and say, what's really important? What are the things that are going on behind the scenes that may not show up on the schedule, and ask questions and sort of pull that information out. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And something that really is probably an issue for a lot of contractors is the level of sophistication or experience in an owner is going to vary widely from job to job. And our program in particular, we're going to open 3 new schools this year, so we've been through this. I've been through opening 40-some schools, so this is old hat to us. We know what landmines are out there for us at the last couple months of schools. But if you're dealing with a school system or a college or university or owner that builds, very, very seldom or once every 4 or 5 or 10 years, those folks are not going to have that recent history or that level of, firsthand school of hard knocks to know what issues are laying out there. So that's when an experienced contractor can be so valuable to sit down at the table and say, look, here are things that we know are going to be issues that you're going to have to deal with. We're just going to give you a heads up. Provide a document and say, think about furniture, think about this. What do you need beforehand? How do you coordinate your move in? This kind of stuff, and then that will show the owner you're trying to help them, and then it doesn't come up as down the road where the contractor is in a spot where I need this and you don't have it.
Right.
So that trick is, and it's just a relationship thing, and it's going to be different with every owner and every contractor because we've had the flip side of that is we've had very reputable big contracting firms with enough horsepower and enough experience and knowledge to build anything come in and do schools and realize they're a lot different than building a high rise or building a athletic stadium or something. And so there are times when they struggle with the things that are particular to school construction, and that's why we sit down and say, here are the things that are going to be different than you're not used to. And our mechanism here at Loudon Schools is we add those to the construction schedule so they're there right in front of everyone.
Right. And it sounds like, obviously, you this is not your first big rodeo. You have a fairly robust staff that is dedicated to facilities and construction and are familiar with managing a design and construction project. And in my experience, the projects that typically have the most, I guess they have the most opportunity for misses and missed expectations would be, say, the church that hasn't built a building in 20 years and
right.
Nobody has any experience, and you have a committee who doesn't know anything about construction, quite frankly, or doing say a retail project for an owner who their core competency is not design and construction, and they're looking for someone to lead them through the project. So especially in those type of scenarios, it's extremely important to walk them through the process. I like to say, get around on the client side of the table and say, hey, here's some things you may not have looked at, like you said. If you've got your FF&E schedule, you need to think it takes 12 weeks to order furniture typically. Make sure you order your phone circuits 6 months in advance. Don't forget about your electrical service, the things that owner furnished, owner installed type things. The owner needs help, quite frankly.
Right.
And it's our job as contractors to bring those things up. And I would say it's appropriate, it is advisable, and it's the right thing to do to help our clients with the things that they may be missing. The problem, I think, is there are contractors, probably fewer than there used to be, but there are contractors out there who see those as opportunities for profit, and it shouldn't be that way.
Well, that's exactly right. It should not be that way, and that's not our goal. And an example of that is here when we move into a new school, when we buy all of our furniture, and if you think about how much furniture goes into a high school, we now require our furniture delivery vendor to put protection down on the floor. I went through a number of schools where we moved in, and then after the move-in, you have this contest between the contractor and the owner about who damaged the floor tile and who damaged this and why is that tile scratched. Well, it wasn't worth it to us to have that argument and spend 6 months trying to figure out who's at fault. We just decided that we're going to spend more money and pay the vendors to wheel their stuff in through our building on top of floor protection, and it takes that whole argument away. Every argument it just ended up in, well, all right, we'll just share it. So it didn't make sense. So we solved that problem and took that on ourselves, and it has gone. It's done great things to improve our closeout relationship with our contractors.
Great. I'm going to go back to something you mentioned a few minutes ago when you were talking about holding owners accountable. How can a contractor hold the owner accountable during a project when there are things that the owner is responsible for, but they are missing their deadlines or dropping the ball?
Well, I think the best way to do that is in the schedule, and I will tell you that I take a personal interest in schedule here. So whenever we have the pre-construction meeting, I go in and say, that's not just there. We don't just need a document that you hand us with every pay request that nobody looks at. It's going to be evaluated. We actually have a fairly significant process and effort towards approval of the schedule. and put it right in there. Okay, Mr. Owner, if you are going to expect me to have power in the building by a certain date, then you have to apply for the power service by this date and make sure that all those major milestones that the owner needs to do are there, and then bring them up in the project meetings, the OAC meetings, to make sure that we keep that in front. Especially for owners that don't do this every day, some of those things may never even come to their mind. So it's just really important to, it shouldn't be seen by the owner as punitive. It should be seen as helpful. If the contractor puts it right in the schedule and then the owner approves the schedule, then there you are, and now you've become a team instead of adversaries.
Gotcha. That's good advice. Are there any other strategies? Well, let's look at an example where an owner has just clearly dropped the ball. They didn't contact the utility company, and the project is delayed. What should a contractor do in a case where their schedule has been extended and they're incurring cost at the fault of the owner? It's clearly the owner's responsibility. How should a contractor handle that situation?
Well, the first thing to do is be careful about bringing that up. I mean, we have covered that and who's responsible for what in our general conditions of our spec. If this happens, this is what's happened. And we get so many claims in here that say, okay, this happened, so now you owe me this amount of dollars. And we've already covered and put into the contract how these things are handled. And so when an exasperating thing for me is when you get claims in here that don't follow the process or the procedure, and then it looks like the contractor's trying to take advantage of it. And in many cases, it's just an oversight and didn't realize it was there. And we recognize in a system that does a lot of construction that our builders are building 10 or 15 projects at a time, and they got a different set of specs for each one, and they're not all the same. And so we understand that. Sometimes things that we put in our contract are not in anybody else's. It's just lessons we've learned. So just be diligent about before you send out a claim. And one of the most exasperating things is, by the way, you've damaged us. We're reserving our rights. We'll sort it out later. So that is one of the things. And now, as the owner goes through the rest of the project, and I've been in this position 15 years, how do I make decisions now because I got this claim out there with no value to it? And so hanging something out, letting it ride till the end of the job, is one of the things that contractors that could do better for us is say, okay, here's the issue, here's what the damage is, let's move on, let's solve the problem and move on. But to intentionally leave them hanging it cripples an owner's ability to make a decision because you don't know what the exposure or the risk is to that particular item.
Sure. So what I'm hearing you say is if there's an issue, first thing to do is read the book, check the contract documents, follow the process for making a claim, and then resolve it sooner rather than later. Don't say, I reserve the right to basically change my mind, let it go, make it worse, etc.
Yeah.
Resolve it. What I've found is these situations typically don't get better. Actually, I've never seen one get better. Never even seen one stay the same. Typically, they grow legs and they walk around and they start causing chaos in other aspects of the project as well. So that's good advice. Go ahead and deal with it sooner rather than later. Now, we've talked a little bit about developing relationships and the importance of relationships. Give me some practical steps that contractors can take to develop better relationships with their owners. I mean, what are some things they can do tomorrow, next week, during their project meetings to build the relationship with the client?
Well, I think that all starts with what we talked about earlier is making sure you sit down and get to know these folks before you start the contract, and make sure you know what's important to the other side. And when people, as you mentioned earlier in our discussion about your background on different sides of the fence, you have a perspective of what the needs of the owner, what the needs of the contractor are. So no matter what side of the table you're sitting on, you have an understanding of that. And some of us have had that same experience and understand that. So when you don't have that, make sure you sit down and get to know everyone and establish a level of trust before it happens. And everything has to do with communication and relationships. And when you're at a table, no matter how big the issue is, if you trust that person to be honest with you, the first problem is solved. Okay, so now I know I'm dealing with somebody that's going to be straight up with me and not try to take advantage of the situation. And there's no easy answer for that, but I'm just convinced that it takes the establishment of a good, solid relationship to make sure that it doesn't go bad.
So, what maybe some advice would be: communicate clearly and communicate often. So what I've found is that in a vacuum of communication, people tend to assume the worst.
Yep.
And so it's better to communicate something, and communicate often, phone call here and there, email, resolve issues early on. It's sort of like you're building political capital, building relationship capital with folks, and you want to solve small issues, and offer solutions early on, so that when, or hopefully not when, but if a conflict arises, you've built up some relationship capital that you can draw on, and you have that trust. Because when there's no trust, then, like as you said earlier, people go to their corners and start looking. They go into protection mode and maybe even retaliatory mode, which at that point nothing gets resolved.
Yeah, and as you were talking there, a perfect example of a practical application is this. Years ago, as I was in the field and here at the system as a project manager, we had a project that had some issues, and the superintendent, who was extremely knowledgeable and very, very, very good as superintendents I've ever dealt with, but he was a difficult person to deal with and just high-strung, and the perfect candidate to get stuff done without a doubt. But he and I just had issues with, on a personal level, and the project was getting done, but there was a lot of strain in the relationship. And my boss came out and said, I'm just going to come out and just walk this job with this guy once a week and just show him that we care. And he was telling me that there's too much stress in that relationship. It's going to be hard to fix. So don't hesitate from either side to bring somebody in and make sure that those people know they're being heard. And this guy who's now retired came out and walked this site with this superintendent. They established a relationship that brought trust back between the two organizations, whether it did between the two people or not. So that can be done. That was a brilliant stroke by my boss to come in and do that, and it really repaired and made sure that my job was to make sure we got what we paid for, and his job was to make sure the project was successful. And it was just like I said, it was one of those things out of the ordinary where change the roles, come out and give a different perspective, so that you don't continue this abrasive relationship that may not recover. So I thought it was a great move on his part.
Yeah, no, that's great, and I've been guilty of underestimating the value of the personal relationship. I realized this I did realize it later in my career than I would have liked to. I wish I'd come out of school understanding the relationship, but being an engineering background, whatever side of the brain that is, the relationship side was starved at some point apparently, and it was all scope, schedule, budget, deliverables.
Right.
And the reality is it's the relationships in business that make the business world go round, and it's really what makes the job worthwhile and fulfilling, is what I've found.
Absolutely.
And it establishes trust, and you can't underestimate the value of personal relationships and trust. And it's amazing how far that will go in solving issues and even preventing issues before they even happen.
Yeah, in this particular case, I see the same person, and that was 15 years ago. And I know to this day that if I had needed advice, he's the person that I would like to get it from, because he's very, very good. And I know that he would take my call and help me if I called and asked. So that that relationship was repaired by one guy's foresight to see how important that was.
Yeah, great. Let's talk about project leadership from the contractor's perspective. Where is the sweet spot of leadership that a contractor should be providing during the course of a project? So, for example, the project is under contract, the contractor has been awarded the project, you have a design team, an owner, perhaps some consultants. I've seen a wide spectrum of leadership that's offered by the contractor. On one end of the spectrum, there's the absentee contractor who's not providing any leadership to the team, not even doing their job. And I've seen the other extreme where the contractor is trying to micromanage everyone. Tell me where's the sweet spot for leadership that a contractor should be offering on a project team?
Well, and that's a particular challenge, I think, on all jobs, and that comes down to a lot of times back to personalities. And we like to see we've seen them all, and we've seen every situation you just described, and some are more successful than others. But I hate to beat that dead horse, but you go back to relationships and say, okay, when you have that first meeting, here are the roles we're going to play. And here's how we like to communicate. Here's what we're going to do. If we have a question, we'll do it through the architect. We'll do that. We establish everything here. A lot of our projects are design bid build because of our environment. So we establish a single point of contact for each side and say, here's how it will be. And you go to that person and you don't go around. Sometimes those problems, when you don't have the good leadership, is you find, I'll just put myself in. If I'm having an issue with a contractor and I expect the project manager to be the lead person, but I keep going to the superintendent and asking questions and then don't tell them, so sometimes you've caused that yourself and you don't realize it. And then, you got to make sure you set up an establishment for the communication flow and how it's done. We actually have a flow chart we do in our pre-construction meeting and say, here's how all communication goes. And then what we like to see is 3 distinct leaders, one from each, the owner, the architect, and the contractor, so that each person understands that, and this is this person's role. So establishment of the roles up front, do that, and along the way, if you get somebody trying to pull ahead or fall back, then you can try to remember this is how we said we're going to do that. If it's a point where there's some level of competency in question, then you just have to go to the other side and say, this relationship's not working, or this is what needs to be improved. But you can't let it fester and just be ignored and then get to the point where no one can stand each other. And so again, that's when you call back that meeting of the leadership of both all the organizations and say, well, we've got this communication issue and we need to address, and just be open and upfront with it.
So what I'm hearing you say is effective leadership, whether if it's provided by a sophisticated owner like your organization, where there are flow charts and well-established policies and procedures, then the contractor just needs to follow those and not break the chain of command. In the case of a less sophisticated, less experienced owner entity, then what I'm hearing you say is the contractor should ask questions to help establish the roles and responsibilities, and maybe in the pre-construction meeting say, hey, how do you want to handle this? How do you want to handle RFIs? How do you want to handle pay requests? Who should I talk to? Do I talk to the owner? Do I talk to the engineer? Do I talk to the architect? And establish the chain of command and the communication protocols if they are not already documented. And then what I'm also hearing you say is when there are issues, call a meeting, ask the team to get together and say, here's an issue we need to talk about. How do we resolve it?
Right. Be upfront and open about it. And again, don't go to your corner and come out swinging. That just never works.
It doesn't work, but I've seen it all too often. Why do you think when there are issues that need to be resolved, why do people avoid those?
Well, I will tell you that from an owner's perspective, and I've played this game in many different roles, but most as an owner. And one of the things that I've noticed about people that report to me is over the years, especially those that have never worked on the other side of the table, probably don't have a real good understanding of the level of risk an individual is taking upon themselves, especially from the contractor standpoint. If the architect makes a mistake, they have responsibility, and that could be significant to them. If a contractor, every mistake they make costs real dollars. From the owner side of the table, it's a lot safer. So I instruct all of our folks, make sure you realize when you're sitting across the table, whether in dispute or in a negotiation, make sure you put yourself in that person's place. the owner of a company could be facing financial ruin if this thing doesn't turn out the way they need it to turn out. Understand how much stress that person is under when you go to sit down, and make sure you're not just holding on because the book says it does. Consider the entire situation, and if you concede a point, does it really hurt you, and does it improve the relationship? Consider that before you go, it's in black and white, you must provide this, and knowing you're causing damage. So, if you can make that assessment when you go to sit down at the table, I think a lot of things will happen. And there's some of that level on the contractor side as well. But from an owner side, I coach my folks to make sure they're fully aware of the whole situation.
That's great advice. Perspective and transparency. You can never go wrong with that.
Right.
Well, we're just about out of time. I know you're a busy guy, so we'll start wrapping this up. A couple more questions for you. I always ask folks that I talk to, what is one book on business or leadership that you would recommend everyone to read?
Well, I have to say I don't do a lot of reading, but I was struck by Good to Great by Jim Collins, who has a lot of things that I'm able to relate to, and and part of that is one of the analogies in that particular book is talking about putting getting your team together and getting the right team members on your bus, and then once you get your team members together, get them on the right seat on the bus, and that resonates with school people because we have buses, but it's a good analogy that can use that your team. When you take over the head of an organization, especially one that's large, you're going to have stronger members and weaker members, and make sure that you shuffle your team members to do the best. Don't put them in a place where they're going to fail, which affects the contractor and the designers. But you may have to restructure project by project, and don't just stick with a certain method the old way, the way we've always done it. It's just never going to work. And that book gave me a great analogy to use, especially here at the school system, about how to you reallocate your resources to better the projects.
Great. You can't go wrong with Jim Collins.
Right.
That is for certain. Well, to wrap up, is there anything else that you feel like contractors should hear from the owner's perspective so that we as contractors can be more successful?
Well, there's probably many things, but the first thing that came to mind when you said that was probably the source of most issues and the most money is risk in a construction project. And those of us that are in big projects know that risk is a huge factor in anything. And an owner that's going to take the approach of shifting as much risk as possible to someone else, whether it be the designer or the constructor, is short-sighted. Make sure that everyone in a particular project is sharing a reasonable amount. I mean, it can't always be equally shared, but perspective to their role in the project to make sure you are taking the risk that you should be taking and not. And the thing is, contractors are smart people, so they know when it's being shifted to them, and they can see that, and that shows some of the hand of an owner that may be in a position that would try to take advantage of someone, and the same with the contractor. I can't tell you how many PCOs or proposed change orders I get that clearly are worded to shift risk back to the owner. If you do this by this date, so take the risk that is expected of you and make sure you represent that well. And I think if we all understand and see that the other side is at risk as well, then there's more incentive for everyone to work together.
Sure. Now that's great advice. Allocate risk fairly. Take what should be yours and take the long-term view.
Yep.
You said that trying to shift too much risk is a short view. Tell me, how do you mean by that? How does taking your fair share of the risk benefit the owner in the long term?
Well, there are certain things that a contractor has control over, and there are certain things that they don't. And if you put all the risk of, and subsurface soil issues are always a big thing, and if everything is done so that, the contractor is responsible for everything, first thing that's going to happen is your prices are going to go up.
Sure.
But then there's no place for that contractor to recover if something happens. So we've taken a hybrid approach here to subsurface issues, and so we're seeing things like the contractor responsible to subgrade, and then below subgrade, we'll take it from there. And so we're letting the contractor know that we understand that there's not only one way to handle something, and to let them know that we have some skin in the game as well. And so that I think when we made that change a few years ago, we did change the entire temperature or temperament, or however you want to say that, of the pre-bid meeting. We used to have excavators come. We have as many excavators come to our pre-bids as we did general contractors, and they'd be, throwing all kinds of leading questions at us. And as soon as we changed the way we approached that subsurface issue, the attitude from the bidder side of the table completely changed, and we saw some lower numbers come in. And granted, we had some responsibility for that when something came up later, but it was a better use of our funds.
Sure.
And a better structure for our relationships.
Right. You're not buying insurance policies.
Right.
Which,
exactly.
When you shift all risk for all potential unforeseen conditions to the contractor, contractors, as you said, were pretty sharp, and especially sharp when it comes to risk. So It has to be priced accordingly. And so that's great advice. Well, listen, we're at the end of our time. I really appreciate you taking the time, Kevin. This has been fantastic information. I've learned a lot, and I'm pretty confident that our listeners have learned as well. If folks want to find out more about your organization, is the website coaa.org the best place to go?
It is. There's all kinds of resources there, and folks you can contact, and there's memberships there, and our folks in Atlanta are wonderful at providing contact information, and this organization is all about helping and sharing, so it doesn't matter if you're an owner or not. If you got a question, there's somebody that can help you.
Great. So even contractors, you don't hang up on contractors if they call?
Absolutely not. We learn a great deal from contractors every day.
Well, that's great. So coaa.org, and I'll have some show notes for this call on the website at constructionleadingedge.com/010, since this is episode 10, and with the links on there as well as some highlights of what we talked about. So Kevin, I really appreciate you taking the time for this today, and thank you for being on the call. It's been extremely helpful.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation.
Fantastic. Thanks so much.
Sure. Talk to you later.